In 1900, America was becoming an urban nation. Our cities were crowded with immigrants arriving from every part of the globe. Between 1890 and 1930, over 22 million came to the United States, including almost 3 million children. For them, school was the place where the American dream was nurtured and the future itself took shape. So powerful was the lure of education that the day after a steamship arrived, 125 children would apply to one New York school. Thousands attended school part-time for lack of space. Some classrooms were as crowded as tenements. Yet for many children, school was nothing more than a mysterious building passed on the way to work. As late as 1910, by one estimate, 2 million children were working across America.
Found children who legally were supposed to be in school. But she asked them, would you rather work in a factory or go to school? And out of 500 or so children, 80% said they'd rather work in a factory than go to school. That says something really dismal about what schools were like at that time.
School buildings were dangerous places. They were dark, they were drafty, they were cold. I remember my mother telling me that as a teacher of immigrants, she got diphtheria, she got scarlet fever, and she had to deal with children who were very ill themselves and who did not have appropriate medical care.
Change was in the air and in the streets. Progressive reformers claimed that too many Americans were spending their childhood in drudgery rather than in school, preparing for a better life. They lobbied for the enforcement of state laws that banned child labor and made school attendance compulsory. The next step for progressive reformers was to change the practice of education itself.
The standard method of teaching in most urban schools was quite literally to toe the line. That is, the children were expected to come up front and recite to the teacher and stand with their toes lined up to the boards and their hands in a particular place as they recited their lesson.
The rigid curriculum of the day was attacked in an 1899 book called The School and Society by John Dewey. A philosopher at the University of Chicago, Dewey would become known as the father of progressive education.
The educational center of gravity has been too long in the teacher, the textbook, anywhere and everywhere you please, except in the immediate instincts and activities of the child himself.
John Dewey believed that if schools were anchored in the whole child, in the social, intellectual, emotional, and physical development of a child, that teaching would be different and that learning would be different, and that schools would be very different, hospitable places for children.
At the 1900 World's Fair in Paris, Americans proudly put their schools on display. They exhibited photographs of the new progressive techniques. Children learning by doing, exercising their bodies as well as their minds, and venturing out of the classroom to explore the world of work and the wonders of nature. Back home, child-centered education quickly spread, even to the industrial city of Gary, Indiana, where students got to take advantage of the most progressive school system of all.
Emerson School had at least 2 city blocks for territory, large athletic fields, a beautiful playground area, and in front of our campus, the major entrance, there was a beautiful lagoon, and the swans were always out there swimming.
The schools were marvelous. As a matter of fact, I had never been in a school where they had a great big swimming pool.
The schools of Gary, Indiana, reflected the lofty ambitions of the town itself. In 1906, the U.S. Steel Company had built the world's largest steel mill on the shores of Lake Michigan. A city sprang up almost overnight as immigrants flocked to Gary, looking for work. To assimilate these new arrivals, town leaders hired William A. Wirt as superintendent of schools. A disciple of John Dewey, Wirt designed lavish, modern buildings that served all grades, and a curriculum that kept students in motion.
Wirt wanted the kids to be running around the school and not have them sit bored in a desk for 4 or 5 hours a day, listening to the teacher drone on. What he wanted was for the kids to have a rich school experience, so they were busy all the time and were getting involved in things that would interest them. And if something didn't, something else would interest them.
And they had auto mechanics. There were all kinds of possibilities. Oh, another one was animal husbandry. And the children learned how to take care of chickens and ducks. We had art classes, we had nature classes. There was so much going on besides our regular classroom work that it was really lovely to go to school. We enjoyed it.
All of this was possible and even affordable because of Wirt's split shift system. In the Gary schools, every space from classroom to workshop, from auditorium to playground, was in constant use. Wirt called his system work, study, play.
There are many ways that young people learn. And those in the past who've been rewarded are those who were very verbal or very mathematical and could learn to spell and do their times tables efficiently. But that left behind a lot of students who had other talents and who could contribute those talents to school. Progressive education at its best, I think, has been designed to tap all the talents of the students as opposed to just a narrow band.
Gary students helped to run the schools. They printed the school newspaper and the yearbook. The goal of this manual training, a progressive educator said, was to make every working man a scholar and every scholar a working man. In the face of massive immigration, progressives claimed that schools could help to preserve the American way of life. The new Gary curriculum reached into areas like health and hygiene that had little to do with the 3 R's.
These were poor people. I mean, they didn't have indoor plumbing in Gary. They didn't have sanitary facilities. So you brought the kids into the school where you cleaned them up. Part of the reason to have swimming pools in the school was so kids would have a bath. So the school was there to do everything that the parents were not doing.
The vice principal would put on an afternoon tea to just show us how we would behave. She would teach us manners that we used here. We had 53 nationalities in Frabel School, and we were Americanized.
The Gary schools were open at night and on weekends to serve the entire community. Leaders of industry hoped that progressive education would socialize students and their families.